morning sun cast long shadows across Kepler Station as Jake Martinez walked through the curved hallways toward his advanced class. The space station was huge, floating in orbit around a peaceful planet that belonged to no single species. Students from dozens of different alien worlds came here to learn together. It was supposed to show that all the different species in the galaxy could get along. Jake was 19 years old, and the only human in most of his classes. His brown hair was messy from sleep, and he carried his backpack over one shoulder like he was still in high school back on Earth. Most of the other students were much older than him, but Jake had scored so high on the entrance tests that they let him in anyway. The alien students often looked at him with curiosity. Humans were still new to space travel compared to other species. His first class was Interspecies Conflict Resolution with Professor Kellen. The classroom was built to fit many different types of alien bodies. Some students sat in regular chairs, others floated in the air, and a few needed special platforms for their large size. Zekhar was already in his usual spot when Jake walked in. The Vorthak student was 7 feet tall with gray skin and yellow eyes that could see in the dark. His people were natural hunters with sharp teeth and claws that could cut through metal. Zekhar always sat in the back corner where he could watch the whole room. It was an instinct from his hunting ancestors. "Morning, Zek," Jake said with a smile, dropping into the seat next to him. Zekhar nodded but looked confused like he always did when Jake sat near him. Most prey species stayed away from Vorthax, but Jake seemed completely comfortable around him. The human even made jokes about it. "Still don't understand why you're not afraid of me," Zekhar said in his deep, growling voice. Jake laughed. "Buddy, I grew up with 3 older sisters. Trust me, you're not that scary." On the other side of the room, Lyra drifted a few feet off the ground. Her species looked like jellyfish made of light with long tentacles that glowed soft blue. The ethereals were telepathic and could read thoughts from most species. But Jake's mind was always quiet to her, which she found interesting. "The human's thoughts are strange," Lyra had once told Zekhar. "Most minds are like open books to me. His is like looking at calm water. You can see the surface but not what's underneath." Professor Kellen entered the room, floating on a small hover chair. He was old, even for a Centaurian, with wrinkled blue skin and 4 arms that moved in graceful patterns when he spoke. His species had been exploring space for thousands of years and were known for their wisdom. "Today we will discuss theoretical conflict scenarios," Professor Kellen announced. "I want you to imagine different situations where species might fight, and think about ways to stop the fighting before it starts." He projected a hologram in the center of the room. It showed 2 groups of aliens facing each other with weapons drawn. One group was tall and covered in scales. The other was short with thick armor plating. "The Reptani and the Corvin have been enemies for centuries," the professor explained. "They fight over mining rights on asteroid fields. How would you resolve this conflict?" Several students raised their hands or made their species equivalent gesture. A student from the insectoid hive spoke first, her voice clicking and buzzing. "Divide the asteroids equally between them." "A logical solution," Professor Kellen agreed. "But both species claim the entire field belongs to their ancestors. Jake, what do you think?" Jake leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed. "Well, they're both wrong. The asteroids don't belong to either of them. They're just floating rocks in space. I'd tell them to flip a coin for who mines first, then take turns every 6 months." The class made various sounds of amusement. Zekhar's deep laugh rumbled like distant thunder. Lyra's glow brightened, which was how her species showed they found something funny. "Flip a coin?" asked a student with crystal skin. "You would leave such an important decision to random chance?" "Why not?" Jake shrugged. "They've been fighting about it for centuries and haven't solved anything. At least this way, they both get something and nobody dies." Professor Kellen nodded thoughtfully. "Human solutions are often unconventional. Your species seems to prefer simple answers to complex problems." "Simple usually works better," Jake said. "Back home we have a saying, don't make it harder than it has to be." The professor moved to the next scenario. This time the hologram showed a space station with different species living together, but tension was building between them. "Resource conflicts on mixed stations," Professor Kellen said. "Different species need different things to survive. The carnivores need fresh meat, the plant eaters need hydroponics gardens, and the energy feeders need direct access to the power core. But space is limited." This time Jake raised his hand first. "Build bigger stations." That requires enormous resources and time, pointed out a student whose species looked like walking trees. Then share better, Jake replied. The carnivores don't need fresh meat every day. The plant eaters can use vertical farming to save space. The energy feeders can schedule time slots at the power core. Everyone compromises a little, everyone gets what they need. Zekar looked at Jake with interest. You speak of compromise like it is easy. My people do not compromise. We take what we need. And how's that working out for your people? Jake asked with a grin. Are the Vorthax the rulers of the galaxy? Or are you sitting in a classroom learning how to get along with others? The room went quiet. Several students made nervous sounds. No one talked to Vorthax that way. They were apex predators, feared throughout the galaxy for their hunting skills and aggressive nature. But Zekar surprised everyone. He threw back his head and laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. The human has a point, he said. We are very good at taking what we want. We are not so good at keeping it. Professor Kellen looked pleased. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need. Different perspectives working together. Jake, your species may be new to galactic society, but you bring fresh ideas. We're pretty good at adapting, Jake said. It's kind of our thing. As the class continued, Jake kept offering simple solutions to complex problems. When other students suggested elaborate treaties and formal negotiations, Jake proposed talking it out over dinner. When they recommended military intervention, Jake suggested economic cooperation instead. The other students found his ideas amusing but impractical. How could someone so young from such a new species think he understood galactic politics? But Lyra watched him carefully. The human's mind remained calm and quiet, even when discussing violence and conflict. Most species became agitated when thinking about fighting. Their thoughts turned sharp and dangerous. Jake's mind stayed as still as deep water. When class ended, the students filed out in their various ways. Some walked, others floated, a few scuttled on multiple legs. Jake, Professor Kellen called out. A moment, please. Jake waited as the room emptied. Did I say something wrong, Professor? Not at all. I'm curious about your background. Your file says you studied conflict resolution on Earth, but you're very young for such advanced coursework. Jake shifted his backpack to his other shoulder. My dad was a police negotiator. He taught me that most fights happen because people are scared or angry, not because they really want to hurt each other. Usually, if you can get them to calm down and talk, they'll figure out a solution on their own. Interesting. And your father taught you this approach?
Him and my mom.
She was a social worker. Between the two of them, I learned that most problems have simple answers. People just make them complicated because they're too proud to try the simple way first. Professor Kellen nodded slowly. Your species continues to surprise us, Jake. You look so fragile. No natural weapons, no enhanced abilities, yet you approach conflict with a confidence that would make a Vorthak warrior proud. Jake laughed. Professor, my species survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and predators that could eat us in one bite. We didn't do it by being the strongest or the fastest. We did it by being stubborn and smart. As Jake left the classroom, he had no idea that those words would prove more prophetic than he could imagine. In a few hours, his stubborn human nature and simple approach to complex problems would be put to the ultimate test. The afternoon class was smaller than the morning session. Only 12 students had qualified for advanced predator species integration, and Jake was the youngest by at least 5 years. The subject was considered dangerous because it dealt with the most aggressive species in the galaxy and how to work with them without getting killed. Professor, Kellen had changed his hover chair for a standing platform, which meant today's lesson was important. The old Centaurian only stood up when he wanted everyone's full attention. Today we study the Krillian Empire, Professor Kellen announced. The holographic display showed a massive insect-like creature with razor-sharp claws and compound eyes. They are perhaps the most feared warrior race in known space. Jake looked at the image with interest while other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Krillian in the hologram was 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, with forearms ending in claws that could slice through steel. Their mandibles could crush bones and their compound eyes could track dozens of targets at once. The Krillians believe that strength determines worth, the professor continued. They have conquered 17 star systems through pure military might. They take what they want and destroy what they cannot use. Zekar leaned forward in his seat. Even Vorthax respected Krillian warriors. My grandfather fought them once, he said quietly. He barely escaped with his life. How do we integrate with a species that only understands violence? Asked a student whose crystalline body reflected the classroom lights. Carefully, Professor Kellen replied. The Galactic Council has been trying to establish diplomatic relations with them for decades. So far, they have killed every ambassador sent to their territory. Jake raised his hand. Maybe we're sending the wrong kind of ambassadors. What do you mean? Well, if they only respect strength, why are we sending diplomats? Why not send warriors who can talk? The class buzzed with discussion. It was a typical Jake solution, simple but unexpected. The problem, Professor Kellen explained, is that our strongest warriors are not our best negotiators, and our best negotiators are not warriors. So train warriors to negotiate or train negotiators to fight, Jake suggested, or find people who are already both. Lyra's glow dimmed as she concentrated. The human has an interesting point. Most species separate their warriors from their thinkers, but what if some individuals could be both? Before Professor Kellen could respond, the room's light suddenly changed from white to red. A harsh alarm sound filled the air, and metal blast doors began sliding down over the windows and exits. Security lockdown, the professor said, his voice tight with worry. Everyone remain calm. But calm was hard to maintain when they could see movement in the corridors outside. Through the reinforced windows, dark shapes moved quickly through the station's hallways. The shapes carried weapons and moved with military precision. Pirates? Whispered a student whose species communicated through color changes on their skin. No, Zekar said, his hunting instincts sharp. These move like soldiers. This is organized. The blast doors finished sealing with a heavy clang that echoed through the room. They were trapped. The only way in or out was through those doors, and they could only be opened from the outside or by station security. Jake pulled out his datapad and tried to access the station's communication network. I can't get through to security, he said. Something's jamming the signals. Professor Kellen activated the classroom's emergency broadcast system, but only static came through the speakers. We appear to be cut off from the rest of the station. The students huddled together except for Jake, who walked to the window and looked out at the corridor. He could see scorch marks on the walls and debris scattered on the floor. Whatever was happening, it involved serious weapons. Movement, Zekar said, joining Jake at the window. His predator eyes could see better in the dim emergency lighting. 3 figures approaching from the left corridor. The first figure that came into view made several students gasp in fear. It was a Krillian warrior, exactly like the ones they had been studying. 8 feet tall, armored in natural chitin plating with forearms ending in claws that gleamed like knives. But this one wore additional equipment, a translator device and what looked like military gear. Behind the first Krillian came 2 more, equally massive and intimidating. They moved with the confident stride of apex predators who feared nothing in the galaxy. Purity Coalition, Professor Kellen whispered, recognizing the symbols on their equipment. They're terrorists who believe the galaxy should be separated by species. They think mixed education programs like ours are an abomination. The lead Krillian stopped directly in front of their classroom window. His compound eyes seemed to look right through the reinforced glass at the terrified students inside. He raised one clawed hand and pressed it against the window. The glass was 6 inches thick and designed to survive explosions, but it creaked under the pressure. They're testing the glass, Jake observed, still standing at the window while other students backed away. Get away from there, hissed the crystalline student. If they break through? The sentence was cut off by a sound like thunder as something massive struck the blast door. The metal door, designed to withstand small explosions, buckled inward. Another impact and another. On the 4th strike, the door tore free from its frame and crashed to the floor. The lead Krillian stepped through the destroyed doorway, and the room filled with the smell of ozone and heated metal. His compound eyes swept across the frightened students, cataloging each species, assessing threats and weaknesses. Behind him, his 2 companions spread out to block any escape routes. Not that there were any. The only exit was through the door they had just destroyed. Professor Kellen stepped forward, his 4 arms raised in a gesture of peace. I am Professor Kellen. These are students. They are not combatants. The lead Krillian's translator crackled to life. Silence, old one. You poison young minds with ideas of species mixing. The galaxy must be pure, each species in its place. His compound eyes continued scanning until they locked onto Jake, who was still standing by the window. The human looked small and fragile compared to the 8-foot warrior, with no natural weapons or armor. Just a young man in casual clothes carrying a backpack full of school supplies. A human, the Krillian said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. The weakest species in the galaxy dares to learn alongside their superiors. Other students pressed themselves against the walls, as far from the Krillians as possible. Lyra's glow had faded to barely visible as she tried to make herself small. Zekhar's muscles were tensed for a fight he knew he could not win, even with his Vorthak strength. The lead Krillian took a step toward Jake. I am Vextor of the 3rd Hunting Clan. I have killed warriors from 17 different species. I have burned colonies and shattered fleets. Your soft flesh will barely slow my claws. Jake looked up from his datapad where he had been trying to send a message to station security. He glanced at the towering alien warrior, took in the razor claws and compound eyes, and let out a genuine laugh. Not nervous giggling or hysterical fear. A real amused chuckle like someone had just told him a good joke. Oh man, Jake said, still smiling. You picked the wrong classroom, buddy. The room went dead silent. Even the other Krillians stopped moving, confused by the human's reaction. In their experience, prey species either ran or froze when confronted by apex predators. Laughter was not a normal response. Vextor's compound eyes focused entirely on Jake, trying to understand what he was seeing. The human showed no signs of fear. His heart rate hadn't increased, his breathing was steady, and his posture was relaxed. It was like he didn't understand the danger he was in. You find death amusing, soft skin? Vextor hissed, raising his razor-sharp claws. Jake shifted his backpack to his other shoulder and took a small step to the side. To most observers, it looked casual, meaningless. But Zekhar, with his predator instincts, noticed something odd about the movement. It put Jake at a better angle, gave him more room to maneuver. Death? Jake said, his smile never wavering. Nah, man, I find irony amusing. Vextor tilted his head, mandibles clicking in confusion. Irony? Yeah, Jake said, gesturing around the classroom with one hand while the other stayed near his backpack. You walked into a room full of students learning about predator species integration, and you assumed you were the apex predator here. The human's voice remained calm and friendly, but something in his posture had changed. His casual slouch was straightening into something more purposeful. His easy smile was still there, but there was something else underneath it now. Something that made Zekhar's ancient hunting instincts suddenly scream a warning. Vextor stared at the human, trying to understand what he was seeing. In his 3 decades of warfare, prey species had always reacted the same way to his presence. Fear, panic, desperate attempts to flee or hide. The human's calm confidence made no sense. You speak of irony while death stands before you, Vextor said, his claws gleaming in the classroom's emergency lighting. Your species is weak. No armor, no claws, no venom. What defense do you have against a true predator? Jake took another small step, and again Zekhar noticed how the human moved. It wasn't random. Jake was positioning himself, creating angles and distances. The Vorthak's predator brain recognized the behavior, even if he couldn't quite understand it. Defense? Jake said, his smile taking on a different quality. Still friendly, but with something else beneath it. Vex, my friend, you're thinking about this all wrong. The human's posture had changed completely now. The slouching student was gone, replaced by someone who moved with quiet purpose. His hands were relaxed but ready, and his weight was balanced on the balls of his feet. You see these? Jake gestured to his own body. No claws, no armor, no natural weapons. Your species looks at that and sees weakness. But my species learned something yours never did. He took another step, and this time Vextor noticed the movement. The human was circling, slowly but deliberately, like he was looking for something. The best predators don't need built-in weapons, Jake continued. They make weapons out of everything around them. Lyra's telepathic abilities were picking up something strange. The human's mind, usually calm as still water, had changed. It was still quiet, but now it was the quiet of a hunter in the moment before the strike. Focused, patient, deadly. Jake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Your thoughts? What are you? Vextor heard her and clicked his mandibles in amusement. Yes, human. What are you? Besides food? Jake's laugh was different this time. Not amused, but genuinely entertained. You really want to know? My species spent 200,000 years as persistence hunters. We didn't evolve claws or armor or venom because we didn't need them. We had something better. He reached into his backpack and every alien in the room tensed. But Jake didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a simple metal stylus used for writing on datapads and his thick xenobiology textbook. We had endurance, Jake said, testing the weight of the stylus in his hand, patience, and the ability to turn anything into a tool. Professor Kellen watched in fascination as his human student held two ordinary school supplies like they were weapons of war. The stylus was just metal and plastic, barely 6 inches long. The textbook was heavy but soft. Against a Krillian warrior's natural armor, they would be useless, unless you knew exactly how to use them. Your claws are impressive, Jake said, beginning to circle again. Vextor turned to follow him, but the human was setting the pace now. Sharp as razors, hard as steel, but they're attached to your body. That limits your range, makes you predictable. Zekar suddenly understood what his instincts had been trying to tell him. The human wasn't prey at all. He was a predator, just a different kind than the Vorthak had ever encountered before. He's not afraid, Zekar whispered to Lyra. Look at his movement pattern. He's hunting. Vextor heard him and snarled. Impossible. Humans are prey species. They run from real predators, do we? Jake asked. Tell me, Vex, what do you know about Earth's evolutionary history? The Krillian lunged without warning, claws whistling through the air fast enough to cut steel. But Jake wasn't there anymore. He had moved at the last possible second, just far enough to avoid the strike. Vextor's claws hit the wall behind where Jake had been standing, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Earth had predators that would eat your whole species for breakfast, Jake said, now behind and to the left of the confused Krillian. Saber-toothed cats with teeth longer than your claws. Cave bears that weighed 3 times what you do. Giant reptiles that could swallow you whole. Vextor spun around, but Jake had moved again. The humans seemed to flow around the classroom like water, always just out of reach. My ancestors didn't outfight those predators, Jake continued, his voice still calm and conversational. They outlasted them. They outthought them. They waited for them to make mistakes. Another lunge, another miss. Vextor was fast, but he was fighting empty air. The human's movement wasn't desperate evasion. It was controlled, purposeful, like he was following some kind of plan. You're playing with him, Lyra realized, her telepathic senses picking up the pattern in Jake's thoughts. You're making him chase you. Persistence hunting, Jake confirmed, dodging another swipe. My ancestors could chase a mammoth for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need to be faster than our prey, just more patient. Vextor was breathing harder now. Krillians were built for quick, brutal attacks, not extended chases. Their natural armor was heavy, and their powerful muscles consumed energy quickly. Stand still and fight, Vextor roared, his compound eyes tracking Jake's movement around the room. Why? Jake asked. You're doing all the work for me. The other 2 Krillians moved to help their leader, but the classroom wasn't big enough for 3 8-foot warriors to coordinate attacks. They got in each other's way, their claws nearly striking each other instead of their target. Jake used their confusion to his advantage, slipping between them like he had studied their movement patterns. Which in a way he had. This was exactly the kind of scenario they had been discussing in class, how to handle aggressive predator species. The thing about natural weapons, Jake said, still playing his deadly game of keep away, is that they're part of your body. You can't drop them when they become inconvenient. You can't adjust their length or change their weight. He held up his stylus, a simple tool that weighed almost nothing. But tools can be anything. The right tool for the right job. Vextor made another grab for the human, and this time Jake let him get close. Very close. Close enough that the Krillian's claws brushed the fabric of Jake's shirt. But as Vextor reached out, Jake moved with sudden, precise violence. The metal stylus flicked out, not at the Krillian's armored chest or arms, but at the small gap where his neck met his shoulder. The spot where the translator device was attached. There was a spark and a small puff of smoke. The translator died. Vextor roared something in his own language, but now the other students couldn't understand him. More importantly, Jake had just demonstrated something terrifying. He had gotten close enough to strike a precise target on a Krillian warrior's body, and the warrior hadn't even seen it coming. Precision beats power, Jake said, backing away again. Every species has weak spots. You just have to know where to look. Professor Kellen watched his student with new understanding. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. Jake was fighting with the same calm intelligence he brought to classroom discussions. He was treating the Krillian like a problem to be solved, not a monster to be feared. Vextor charged again, but his movements were wilder now, less controlled. Frustration and oxygen debt were affecting his judgment. Jake continued his patient dance around the room, always just out of reach, always moving with purpose. Getting tired? Jake asked. That's the thing about persistence hunting. We don't have to win fast. We just have to not lose until you wear yourself out. The human's breathing was still steady, his movements still controlled. He had been dodging and weaving for several minutes, but he showed no signs of fatigue. Meanwhile, all three Krillians were breathing hard, their attacks becoming sloppy. This is impossible, one of the other Krillians gasped in accented standard. Humans are weak. Jake's smile was sharp now, showing teeth. No, he said. Humans are patient. There's a difference. Vextor was no longer the confident predator who had entered the classroom. Sweat dripped from his compound eyes and his breathing came in harsh gasps. The heavy natural armor that made him nearly invulnerable was now working against him, trapping heat and adding weight to every movement. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he was taking a casual walk. His breathing was steady, his movements fluid and relaxed. He had been leading the Krillians in their deadly dance for 10 minutes now, and he showed no signs of slowing down. You know what the funny part is? Jake said, easily sidestepping another increasingly wild swipe from Vextor. You actually helped prove my professor's point about interspecies conflict resolution. Professor Kellen blinked his large centaurian eyes. Even in this deadly situation, his student was still thinking about class lessons. Sometimes, Jake continued, ducking under a claw that would have taken his head off. The best way to resolve conflict is to let the other guy tire himself out. One of the other Krillians, frustrated by his inability to catch the human, smashed his fist into a desk. The metal furniture crumpled like paper, but the violent display only wasted more of his energy. This is humiliating, the Krillian snarled. We are apex predators. He is just a soft human. Apex predators, Jake repeated, now using the broken desk as a barrier between himself and his attackers. You know, that's an interesting term. On Earth, we had a lot of animals that thought they were apex predators. Most of them are extinct now. Lyra watched the human's mind with fascination. His thoughts were like looking at a chess master playing a game, every move calculated, every possibility considered. But underneath that cold intelligence was something else. Not cruelty, but an absolute certainty that he would survive this encounter. The saber-toothed cats thought they were apex predators, Jake said, vaulting over another broken desk as Vextor stumbled trying to corner him. 12-inch fangs, muscles like steel cables. They could kill a mammoth with one bite. He paused behind an overturned table, finally standing still for a moment. The Krillians saw their chance and rushed him from 3 directions. But you know what happened to them? Jake asked, and at the last second he moved again. Not running this time, but diving forward, under Vextor's reaching arms and between his legs. The 3 Krillians collided with each other in a tangle of armor and claws, too tired and frustrated to coordinate their attack properly. They went extinct, Jake finished, now behind all 3 of his attackers, because they couldn't adapt when the world changed. Zekar made a sound of understanding. Pack hunting, he said to Lyra. Humans are pack hunters. He's not trying to fight them alone. He's trying to make them fight each other. And it was working. The Krillians were snapping at each other now, their natural aggression turning inward as exhaustion and frustration took hold. Vextor shoved one of his companions away from a strike that had come too close to his own head. Teamwork, Jake observed, still moving in his patient circle around the room. Another thing my species is good at. But you guys seem to be having some coordination problems. Vextor separated himself from his companions and faced Jake alone. His compound eyes were wild now, his movements erratic. The precision that made Krillians such feared warriors was gone, replaced by the desperate swings of someone who couldn't understand why he was losing. What are you? He demanded in broken standard, his translator still dead. Jake stopped moving. For the first time since the fight began, he stood completely still. The sudden change made everyone in the room tense, students, professor, and Krillians alike. I'm a human being, Jake said simply. We're persistence hunters, pack coordinators, tool users, and problem solvers. We survived ice ages and supervolcanoes not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being the most adaptable. He held up his stylus and textbook again. And right now, You're my problem to solve. Vextor charged one final time, putting everything he had left into a desperate attack. His claws extended fully, his mandibles opened wide. His compound eyes focused entirely on the small human who had humiliated him. But Jake was no longer where Vextor expected him to be. The human had done something impossible. Instead of dodging away from the attack, he had moved toward it, slipping inside the Krillion's reach where the deadly claws couldn't reach him. He used his textbook as a shield against Vextor's mandibles and his stylus as a precision instrument. The metal stylus found the exact spot Jake had been aiming for. Throughout the entire fight, the small neural cluster at the base of Vextor's skull, just behind the compound eyes. It was a weak point every student in xenobiology class learned about. But Jake was the first to think of it as a target instead of just academic knowledge. The stylus touched the neural cluster for just a fraction of a second. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to disrupt the nerve signals that controlled Vextor's voluntary muscle movement. The massive Krillion warrior collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. His nervous system temporarily scrambled. He was conscious and could still breathe, but he couldn't move or coordinate his limbs. The other two Krillions stared in shock as their leader fell. In their culture, such a thing was impossible. Krillions were never defeated in single combat by prey species. How? One of them whispered. Jake straightened up, not even breathing hard. Xenobiology class, he said matter-of-factly. Professor Chen's course on non-human anatomy. Very interesting stuff about neural cluster locations in arthropod-derived species. He looked at the two remaining Krillions, who were backing away from him now. Their earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by something no Krillion warrior should ever feel: fear of a prey species. Now, Jake said, his voice returning to the friendly tone he used in class discussions. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you surrender and wait for station security to sort this out. The hard way is you end up like your friend there. One of the Krillions looked at Vextor's paralyzed form and made a decision. He dropped his weapons and raised all four arms in surrender. The other Krillion snarled and prepared to attack, but Jake held up one finger. Think about this carefully, Jake said. Your leader there? He was bigger than you, stronger than you, and probably more experienced than you. How do you think you'll do against me when you're already tired and he couldn't land a single hit? The Krillion looked at Jake, then at his paralyzed leader, then at his surrendering companion. Slowly, reluctantly, he also raised his arms in defeat. Smart choice, Jake said approvingly. Then he pulled strips of fabric from his own jacket and began fashioning makeshift restraints. Always better to think your way out of a problem than fight your way out. Professor Kellen stared at his student in amazement. Jake, how did you know about the neural cluster technique? Like I said, xenobiology class. Plus, my mom always told me that if you're going to study something, you should really understand it. Jake finished tying up the first prisoner. I figured if I'm going to learn about different species, I should know how they work. All of how they work. Lyra drifted closer, her glow bright with curiosity. I couldn't read your intentions during the fight. Your mind was so focused, so quiet. Jake grinned his familiar, easygoing grin. Yeah, my dad taught me that too. He called it getting in the zone. Useful for studying, useful for sports, useful for dealing with classroom disruptions. Zekhar approached cautiously, looking at Jake with new respect and perhaps a little fear. You were never in danger, were you? This was all planned. Not planned exactly, Jake admitted, checking his knots. But I had a pretty good idea how it would go. Persistence hunting isn't just physical. It's psychological too. You wear down your target's will to fight, not just their body. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Station security was finally arriving, along with the distinctive whine of medical hover gurneys. About time, Jake muttered, then raised his voice. In here, we have 3 prisoners ready for pickup and 1 who needs medical attention. As security personnel flooded into the destroyed classroom, Jake gathered up his stylus and textbook and put them back in his backpack like nothing had happened. Well, he said to Professor Kellen, that was educational. What were we talking about before we were interrupted? The security team that entered the classroom was a mix of different species, all trained to handle dangerous situations on the multi-species station. But they stopped in confusion when they saw the scene before them. 3 Krillion warriors, the most feared predators in known space, were sitting on the floor with their hands bound. One was completely paralyzed but conscious, staring at the ceiling with compound eyes full of disbelief. The other two looked like they had been through an exhausting battle, but showed no signs of injury. Standing calmly beside them was a human teenager with messy brown hair, holding a school backpack and looking like he had just finished a normal class. "Station security," announced the team leader, a tall Centaurian with 4 arms full of weapons. "We received reports of a terrorist attack in this section." "That's right," Jake said helpfully. "These 3 are with the Purity Coalition. They broke down the blast door and threatened the class. I've got them secured for you." The security leader looked from the massive Krillian warriors to the small human student. "You secured them?" "Yep. That one there needs medical attention. His nervous system is temporarily disrupted, but he should be fine in a few hours." The other 2 surrendered peacefully once we talked it out. Behind the security team, medical personnel were setting up equipment to treat Vextor. A Centaurian doctor ran scanners over the paralyzed Krillian while shaking his head in amazement. "Precise neural disruption," the doctor reported. "Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike and exactly how much pressure to apply. Too much and it would have caused permanent damage. Too little and it wouldn't have worked at all." "Jake did it," Professor Kellen said, still staring at his student in wonder. "With a writing stylus." The security leader's 4 eyes all focused on Jake. "You're telling me a human student defeated 3 Krillian terrorists in single combat?" "Well, it wasn't really single combat," Jake corrected. "More like problem-solving with a physical component." Zekar stepped forward, his predator instincts finally understanding what they had witnessed. "He didn't fight them," the Vorthak explained. "He hunted them. Like my ancestors hunted in the old days, but different. Better. Persistence hunting," Lyra added, her telepathic abilities still trying to process what she had seen in Jake's mind during the fight. His species evolved as pack hunters who could chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. The security team began processing the prisoners, but their leader kept looking back at Jake with curiosity and respect. Word of what had happened would spread through the station within hours. By the end of the day, every species would know that a human student had defeated Krillian warriors without weapons or armor. "I'll need a full report," the security leader told Jake. "Sure thing, but can we do it after class?" Professor Kellen was just getting to the interesting part of his lecture. Professor Kellen laughed, a sound like chimes in the wind. "Jake, I think today's events have taught us more about interspecies relations than any lecture could." As the security team finished removing the prisoners, the remaining students gathered around Jake. They looked at him differently now, not as the harmless human who made simple jokes about complex problems, but as something far more dangerous and interesting. "You were never afraid," said the crystalline student, her body reflecting rainbow colors of confusion and awe. "Even when he threatened to kill you, you just laughed." Jake shrugged. "Fear's not very useful in a crisis. It makes you do stupid things. Better to stay calm and think your way through the problem." "But how did you know you could win?" asked another student. "I didn't know for sure," Jake admitted, "but I had some advantages they didn't expect. They saw a soft human with no weapons and assumed I was helpless. But my species has been dealing with bigger, stronger predators for thousands of years." He sat down in his usual chair, which had somehow survived the fight undamaged. "The thing about being human is that we adapt. We don't have claws or armor or venom, so we learn to use our brains instead. We learn to be patient, to work together, to use tools, and to recognize weaknesses in other species." Professor Kellen added thoughtfully. "That's just good studying," Jake said with a grin. "If you're going to learn about xenobiology, you should really learn about it. All of it." Zekar sat down carefully, his movements showing new respect for the human beside him. "My people have legends about the perfect hunt. A hunt where the prey never realizes it's being hunted until it's too late. I thought they were just stories." "Nah," Jake said. "Just good technique." Lyra drifted closer, her glow bright with curiosity. "When you were fighting, your mind was so focused, so quiet. I've never seen thoughts like that before. My dad taught me that. He's a hostage negotiator back home. He said that in a crisis, the person who stays calm has the biggest advantage. Panic makes you weak, but focus makes you strong." Professor Kellen activated the classroom's holographic display again, showing the image of Krillian warriors they had been studying before the attack. "Class, what we witnessed today was a perfect example of why we study these subjects." Jake used knowledge from multiple disciplines, xenobiology, psychology, evolutionary theory, to solve a real-world problem. Plus some basic physics. Jake added. Leverage, momentum, pressure points. It's all just science. The class spent the next hour discussing what had happened, analyzing Jake's tactics and the psychological factors that had led to his victory. For most of the students, it was their first real look at how humans approached conflict, not with superior strength or speed, but with intelligence, patience, and adaptability. As the class ended and students began filing out, Zekhar lingered behind. Jake, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. For what? I thought your species was weak. Prey animals trying to play with predators. I was wrong, Jake laughed. You weren't wrong about humans being different from Vorthax. We are, we're just not weak. Different doesn't mean inferior. Your father, the negotiator. Did he teach you to fight like that? He taught me to think like that, Jake corrected. The fighting part I figured out on my own. But yeah, he taught me that most conflicts can be resolved if you understand what the other person really wants and why they want it. And what did the Krillians want? Jake shouldered his backpack, the same casual gesture he made every day after class. They wanted to feel superior, to prove they were apex predators, so I let them try until they exhausted themselves. Then I showed them that apex predator is just a state of mind. As they walked toward the door, Zekhar asked one more question. Jake, are all humans like you? Jake considered this seriously. Not exactly like me, no. But the basic traits? Yeah, pretty much. We're all persistence hunters at heart. We're all tool users. We're all problem solvers. And we're all a lot more dangerous than we look. They stepped into the corridor, where maintenance crews were already working to repair the blast door the Krillians had destroyed. Other students and faculty members stopped to stare as Jake walked past. The human who had defeated 3 Krillian terrorists, and then calmly asked to continue with his lecture. One more thing, Jake said to Zekhar. Don't feel bad about misjudging humans. Happens all the time. Most species make the same mistake. What mistake is that? Jake's smile was friendly as always, but now Zekhar could see the predator lurking underneath it. They assume that just because we don't have claws or fangs, we're not dangerous. But we've been the apex predator on our planet for 50,000 years. We didn't get there by being weak. As news of the incident spread through Kepler Station, it would change how every species viewed humanity. The soft, emotional creatures who made jokes about their own weaknesses had just demonstrated why they had earned their place among the stars. They weren't the weakest species in the galaxy. They were persistence hunters, pack coordinators, tool users, and problem solvers. They adapted to any challenge, learned from every encounter, and never gave up. And sometimes, when the situation called for it, they could be the most dangerous predators anyone had ever encountered. Jake Martinez, the human who had laughed at a Krillian killer, became a legend that day. But to him it was just another interesting class discussion, one that happened to have a more practical component than usual.